Hey everybody, how's it going? In this video I'm going to teach you how to practice and learn scales from math rock and modern guitar. So, if you're a new student who's learning scales for the first time, one problem that you might have is you have no idea what to do with the scale pattern that you've just learned. Take this pattern for example. You might learn this, and you might have no idea of what the point of learning it was. Well, the first thing that you need to know about the scale patterns that you learn is that scales provide the notes that you can use to write your riffs, chords, melodies, and ideas. So the scale patterns just basically carve out the notes that you can play on the fretboard that will sound good. In this case, these are the notes of the major scale. So when I played this pattern here, I can use these notes to write all kinds of riffs for different styles. In this case, be it math rock or modern guitar. So this kind of leads into my first point, which is when you are learning scales for modern guitar and math rock, you really want to focus on being able to visualize the scale. So what that means is that you can look at the fretboard and you can see the notes that you're able to hit, which will help you to make your note choices and help you to write riffs, chords, melodies, and ideas. So when it comes to practicing then, if we're working on visualization, you want to try and avoid just practicing scales going up and down, because when you're practicing scales going up and down, you're not really focusing on anything musical and you're just rehearsing a very specific skill of going up and down. So when you learn a scale, do this enough to just get acquainted with the basic shape of the scale, but don't over practice that kind of thing because it won't lead to a sound or a style that you want. So play it slowly. Look at your hands, see what you're doing, see what notes that you're hitting, and really just focus on being able to see what you've played on the fretboard in that particular area. For my second point, and perhaps the most important thing that you can do in your practice, we want to try and get creative with our scale, as in we want to try and create music with it, because that's the point of the scale again, to provide the notes to create music. So when I carve out my scale like this, I want to try and just experiment with putting different notes together to see if there are sounds that I like. I want to try and create some riffs, some melodies. So I might just take a look at the scale here and just try and start with one note, find another note, maybe on a different string. Playing around with some string skips is a great way to get some angular sounds. I might create that. That's all coming from the scale. Then maybe I'll do another string skip. That creates a cool interval type sound. And you can see that comes from there. And then maybe I'll move like that or move like that and I have another cool sound happening. Maybe I'll move like that, etc. So I'm playing around with the scale in order to create a little riff idea or a melody. And as I'm doing that, I'm quizzing myself on what the scale pattern looks like, which is helping me to learn it. And as I'm doing it, I'm having fun, I'm creating art, which is all great and will keep you more engaged with playing and less disinterested in this idea of scale practice. Another thing that we can try to do is create chords. So in this case, all a chord is multiple notes played at once. So I can take a look at my scale pattern and I can just try to put together a cluster of notes and see if I like the sound. Do I need to know what it is? Not really right now. I just need to focus on whether I like the sound or not. So again, I could start on the very first note of the scale, and I could just find another note in the scale, taking a look again at my pattern and trying to visualize what's going on. So maybe I start with that. Okay, I think I like that sound. That sounds interesting. Maybe I'll try this. So that sounds pretty cool. I could add another note in, and all of a sudden, I have a chord. Do I know what it is? Yes, but do you need to know what it is? Not really, because it's at least a sound that you like for now, and you can figure that out later. It's a 6/9 chord, by the way. Let's try another example. So we could start on a different note in the scale. Like let's say we start on this note here, third note of the scale. So now I could just take a look at my pattern. Like I see that all of these notes here on the A, D, and G string are all in the scale pattern on fret 2. So I could use that. I kind of like that sound. I could get this note on the 3rd fret here of the B string, and I could grab this. That's kind of a cool sound. So that's another shape that I could use. And again, I'm quizzing myself on the scale. I could try and change that shape. I could change it again. That one sounds pretty good. So I'm a really big fan of doing these chord exercises here. We're just creating chords because chords are really at the basis for a lot of our lines. So let's say we come up with a chord like this here. Simple 3-note shape. If I have something like this, or even the shape that I came up with earlier, we can arpeggiate these chords and we can add extra scale notes in order to create cool little lines and runs. So let's say I take something like this. If I just keep going, or I try to add some notes from the scale, I can start to create the basis of a riff. I could try going in this direction as well. And then I could add some more notes to that. And so on and so forth. So for point number 2, get creative with the scales, create riffs, chords, and ideas. Really just play with it. That will help you to learn it, and that will help you to learn it in a way that's fun and engaging. For point number 3, we want to try and take things that we already know and try to see them from within the scale. So let's say that we already know some chords that are played in this position of the guitar. Again, if our scale pattern looks like this, we could take a chord like a G major chord. Really classic thing. So all of the notes here are contained within the scale pattern. So if I look at that first note, obviously it's the first note of the scale. The second note is the third note of the scale. This note right here is in there. And then finally, this last note is right there. And so now I can see how it all relates, and I can change it up if I want, because I know what notes I can hit to change the sound. Let's say we know some jazzier, more kind of mathy chords. So let's say I know something like this. Again, I can try to see how this all fits within the scale. Great exercise for helping me to practice what's here. So I could take a look at this first note. Again, it's the first note of the scale, so pretty obvious. The second note, right there. The third note, that one. And the last one. So now that it's all been lined out there, I really have a good understanding of where it came from, and that really helps me to get a new sense of what's going on here. And with these kind of exercises, and the exercise in point number 2, these are also really good because they help you to avoid practicing something that's overly rehearsed. So again, the problem with going up and down with the scale is that you end up rehearsing something that you're just playing over and over again. You're not really learning the scale in a dynamic way because you have no sense of some of the other options that you could try. So it's the equivalent of learning a sport and just learning the mechanics for a few different scenarios. If you want to be really good at a sport, you want to be able to practice a lot of different scenarios so that you can change things up on the fly or be able to react and improvise as things go on. So by practicing the scale in many different kinds of ways or different kinds of musical situations, that's going to make you flexible, and that's going to help you to be more creative. So for point 3, again, try to visualize how things that you already know fit within the scale patterns. For my 4th tip, we want to try practicing lines that move between multiple scale patterns. So let's say that we're working on more than just this first pattern here. Let's say we've got another pattern like this, which is moving between roughly frets 3 to fret 8, another pattern right here, and even one more all the way up here. So we want to try and write some lines that move between all of these patterns because we want to eventually try and see all of our patterns as a single unit. If we can do that, that'll allow us to write some more interesting lines that move up and down and have some more interesting motion. So let's say that I'm writing a line just working on the first 2 patterns here. So I would want to try and just write something that moves between the 2 so that I can kind of just quiz myself and see how they interact with each other. So let's say I take this second one again. So I might just try and put together some notes like, and I might just string them together until I find a sound that I like. So as I'm moving through that, right, I'm cutting across 2 different patterns. Let's say I have something like this, again, like we'll try another line, maybe just starting up here. So I'll go, like that. So that's cutting between 2 different patterns. Or we could try one more here. So let's say I just maybe take some chords. Like I could go and do something like this. So this is moving between these 2 patterns. Like that. Anything you play really that goes between the 2 patterns will force you to try and test your knowledge of what you actually know. We could also try something even more simple. Like let's say I just take a simple ascending line, like so a little kind of scale line, or I could go like little kind of interval line like that. So that's good too. Just anything again that gets you moving across multiple scale patterns. For tip number 5, this one's really simple. Get a looper pedal. When I was learning my scale patterns, a looper was a big part of how I was able to practice and how I was able to have fun with practicing. So let's say you come up with some kind of riff or musical idea within your first scale pattern. What you can do is you can take the idea that you've come up with and you can loop it. And you can create some layers, play around with writing different parts, or just seeing what sounds sound good over top of something. So let's say I've come up with a riff using scale pattern number 1. Let's say I have something like this, like. So now I can just loop that and then try and write something over top. So if I'm sticking within this first scale pattern here, one easy thing to try is just some arpeggios. So maybe I find some shapes. So maybe I like this shape, right? I can try and just play it over top and see if it sounds good. So I think I like that, so I'll add that to my loop. So now we could try adding in another sound. Maybe we could find another arpeggio that we like, and we could try and add that in over top. So maybe we'll try something like this. So now let me add that into the loop. So now we have that sound. Maybe we can try and add a different kind of texture. Like why don't we try something more kind of percussive, like. Another layer. So now this is kind of growing. I have a lot of different parts going on. Maybe if I'm running out of space, I could try and write a bass line. Again, anything that I play and do using the scale counts as practice because I'm trying to figure out different things that work for my sound, which forces me to try and see the underlying patterns so that I know what notes I can hit. So let's try and just play some bass notes over top. If I want, I could try playing some improv over top. So any kind of improvisation is also good because, again, you're just doing something that tests your knowledge of the scale. So again, that counts as scale practice, just messing around. Let's try another idea. So let's say we don't have a riff and we want to just try and maybe create something like a beat. So I could just start with a single note idea. Again, maybe using the same rhythm. So we could create a harmony. We'll try some harmonics. So different techniques can be a fun way to play around with some sounds too. And a volume swell. Maybe I have a sound up there. Like a little tremolo picking kind of thing. And maybe we'll try and harmonize that. tapping I do. Harmonize that. So we'll add another line there. We'll add some more harmony. So here, I'm really moving between multiple scale patterns. So let's try one of those kind of ideas. And also, we can play around with some pedal sounds. So let's say I have some major reverb now. So now I can try and write a line that just simply moves between all of my patterns. Alright, so that's playing with a looper. Great way to explore musicality and test your knowledge of the scale patterns. Alright, for the final tip, this is pretty simple. It's important to practice parts of the scale that you are not as comfortable with. So let's say that you get pretty good at playing in this part of the fretboard over here. You're pretty good at playing this scale pattern. You're pretty good at playing this scale pattern. And when you get up here, things really start to break down. It's really important to try and focus on the weak parts in your playing. So if you're not so good at playing this pattern right up here, you really need to focus on practicing this area of the fretboard. And again, when you're practicing it, just try to do what we've talked about today. Try to get musical with it. If I'm practicing up here in the key of G, then maybe a fun way to make the scale pattern more interesting is just to practice using something like tapping. So I could just play some chords in my first scale pattern, and I could just do some tapping up here. Like, listen to this. I'm going to play this scale using some tapping here. And as you can see, as I break up the notes or play them in a different order, I get all kinds of cool sounds that work for creating music. So again, make sure to practice scale patterns that are in an area of the fretboard that you find most challenging. And yeah, so those are my tips on practicing scales. Just be creative and musical with them. Don't just practice them all the way up and down over and over again, and you'll be in good shape and get a looper. All right, so I'll catch you guys in the next video.